The Hells Angels biker followed the little girl's screams into a flooded subway entrance, and his rage cracked the concrete. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a stormy evening, with rain pouring down relentlessly, flooding the streets of the city. Jake Reaper Morrison, a seasoned Hells Angels biker, was making his way home after a long ride, his Harley-Davidson roaring through the wet streets. His leather jacket clung to his back, the patches on his vest reflecting his history, his reputation, and his many battles. As he approached a crowded intersection, something unusual caught his attention. He heard a piercing scream. It was a young girl's scream, desperate, full of fear. It cut through the sound of the storm like a knife, freezing Jake in place. He instinctively slowed down, his heart rate picking up. The scream echoed again, louder this time, followed by the sound of splashing water. Jake didn't think twice. He made a sharp turn, heading towards the source of the noise, his mind already calculating the worst-case scenario. As he drove down a narrow alley, the streetlights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch out like dark fingers. The sound of rushing water grew louder. The rain had turned the alley into a makeshift river, water rising quickly, flooding the drains, and seeping into the cracked pavement. His bike's tires splashed through the water, but Jake barely noticed. His focus was solely on the scream. It wasn't just a call for help, it was a cry for survival. Jake's instincts kicked in, and he pushed his Harley harder, skidding around the corner where the sound seemed to be coming from. And then he saw her, a small figure, barely visible through the sheets of rain, standing in front of an entrance to an old, flooded subway station. She was trapped. The water had reached her waist, but she was still holding on to something, desperation in her eyes. Her clothes were drenched, her face pale with fear. But it wasn't just the water that made her look terrified. It was the way she was looking around, as if something else was hunting her. Jake's heart clenched. Without a second thought, he swung his leg off the bike and ran towards her. "Hey, are you okay?" he shouted over the roar of the storm. The girl's eyes locked onto his, full of fear. She shook her head violently. "No, they're coming," she cried, barely able to keep her voice steady. "Please, help me." She pointed to the entrance of the subway, where the dark shadows seemed to swallow everything around them. Jake didn't ask questions. He could see the fear in her eyes, the panic in her every movement. His rage, usually buried deep under years of discipline and anger, began to bubble to the surface. No one, especially a child, should be left to face this alone. As he approached the girl, a loud crash echoed from behind them. Something, or someone, had just broken through the wreckage at the subway entrance. Jake's fists clenched, his jaw tightening. Whatever it wasn't going to touch her. He reached out, lifting the girl into his arms, and as he turned, his boots splashed through the rising water. He heard the unmistakable sound of someone, or something, approaching quickly. Without hesitation, he moved faster, every step fueled by his rising rage. No one would harm her, not on his watch. As he neared the bike, he could feel the cold water soaking into his boots, but his only thought was getting the girl to safety. The threat behind them was growing closer, but Jake wasn't about to stop. He had no idea who, or what, was chasing her, but one thing was clear. If they thought they could scare him, they had another thing coming. His fists were ready, his heart was pounding, and the rage in his chest was as cold as the storm itself. This wasn't over yet. I should have known something was off, but the girl's desperate cries drowned out every logical thought. I had her in my arms, running for the bike, feeling the weight of both the water and her fear, but something in me shifted as I heard that second crash. I could tell from the sound that whatever was behind us wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. I threw a glance over my shoulder, and my heart skipped a beat. Shadows moved in the distance, but they weren't just shadows. There were figures coming toward us, fast, like they were ready to pounce. A sickening chill crawled up my spine. I didn't know who they were, but I knew one thing for sure. They weren't here for a friendly chat. I could hear them shouting, and their voices only made the fear inside the girl intensify. "Please, Don't let them get me, she whispered in a voice full of terror, her small hands clutching my jacket so tight I could feel her little body trembling against mine. I didn't say a word. I just gritted my teeth, focused on getting her the hell out of there. I reached the Harley, my hands fumbling with the keys, but it wasn't the keys I was worried about. It was the fact that the streets were flooding, and that made the bike harder to handle. The rain was coming down harder now, the water rising faster, but I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. I got her onto the back of the bike, holding her as tightly as I could, my mind racing, my senses sharpening. I could feel every muscle in my body tense as I started the engine. The roar of the Harley's motor was drowned by the sound of the storm, but it didn't matter. The bike was the only chance I had to get her to safety. I revved the engine, making the tires spin a little before I finally got enough traction to pull us out of the alley. The road was barely visible in the downpour, but I wasn't stopping. The floodwater was coming up fast, and I had no idea how long we had before it overwhelmed the streets entirely. Behind us, the figures were closing in. I didn't know who they were, but I knew they weren't going to stop. I needed to lose them. The roar of the bike echoed through the narrow streets, and for a second, it felt like the world was just me, the girl, and the sound of the engine. But that peace was short-lived. A bright flash of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, and I knew it was them. They had a vehicle, something that could handle the water, something I didn't have. I slammed the throttle, pushing the bike harder, but the road was slick, and the floodwater was making it harder to maneuver. I could feel the girl shaking behind me, and I knew I couldn't keep this pace forever. I needed to think fast. I saw a bridge up ahead, a way to get us out of the main streets. If I could get to the bridge, maybe I could shake them off. My instincts were kicking in, but I didn't want to make any sudden moves that would risk the girl's safety. I kept the bike steady, weaving between cars that were now stranded on the road. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Hold on," I shouted, though I wasn't sure if she could hear me over the sound of the engine. Her grip tightened around me, and I could feel her small body pressed against my back, her breath coming in quick gasps. We were almost there, just a little further, and then we would be out of the danger zone. But as I reached the bridge, something unexpected happened. The headlights of the car behind me got brighter, the sound of the engine grew louder. They were catching up. I had no choice now. I swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding a stalled vehicle, and I could hear the sound of the tires screeching behind me. The people chasing us weren't just some random thugs. They were organized, relentless. And I had no idea why they were after a little girl, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them have her. As I rounded the corner onto the bridge, I heard the screech of tires, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal crashing into concrete. I didn't look back. My focus was entirely on getting the girl somewhere safe. The storm was still raging, the rain coming down so hard it felt like the world was trying to swallow us whole. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I reached the end of the bridge, the rain still falling in sheets. I couldn't go any further. My heart was racing, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was for sure. I wasn't going to stop until she was safe. I could hear the sound of the bike's engine struggling against the weight of the floodwater as I pushed it harder, trying to get across the bridge. The girl's grip on my back tightened with every bump and swerve. I didn't dare look behind me, but I could feel the eyes of the pursuers on us. Their headlights were relentless, their engine roaring as it gained on us with each passing second. The tension in my chest was unbearable. I had no idea who they were or why they were after a little girl, but one thing was for sure. They weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted, and I wasn't going to let them have her. Not on my watch. I pushed the throttle even harder, ignoring the pounding rain, the slick road, and the pain from my legs screaming at me. The Harley was built for the open road, not for this. Narrow, wet streets, and a deadly chase. But it was all I had. The bridge stretched ahead, dark and narrow, barely visible through the rain. I could feel the cold water splashing against my boots, but I couldn't slow down. Not now. The girl's face flashed in my mind. Her wide, terrified eyes. She was just a kid. She didn't deserve any of this. As I neared the end of the bridge, I saw a small alleyway just ahead. It was a tight squeeze, but it looked like it might lead to a street with fewer cars. I aimed for the alley, praying the bike would handle it. But as I turned sharply, I heard the unmistakable screech of tires on wet pavement behind me. They were close. Too close. I didn't have much time. The alley was just wide enough for the bike, but the rain was making it slippery. I leaned into the turn, my shoulder brushing against the brick walls as I fought to keep control. The engine roared, and the bike lurched forward as we made the turn. I didn't look back, but I could hear the screech of tires behind me. The pursuit was relentless. They weren't going to let us escape that easily. The alleyway was a dead end, and I knew that. But there was something else there. A narrow set of stairs leading up to a fire escape. If I could just get there before they caught up with us, we might have a chance. I sped up, racing down the alley, feeling the adrenaline surge through my veins. The girl was silent now, her breath quick and shallow against my back. I could feel her fear, but I couldn't let her see mine. Not now. I had to be strong for her. As I reached the stairs, I saw the flash of headlights in my rearview mirror. They were closing in fast. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just in front of the stairs. I didn't have time to think. I jumped off the bike, grabbing the girl and sprinting up the stairs with everything I had. I could hear the sound of the car behind us, its engine roaring as it approached the alley. I knew we didn't have much time. I reached the fire escape, pulling the girl up with me as fast as I could. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could feel the weight of her in my arms, but I couldn't stop. Not now. The sound of the car screeched to a halt at the alley entrance. I glanced back, my heart in my throat. They were here. The car's headlights illuminated the alley like a spotlight, but they couldn't see us yet. We were just above them, hidden by the shadows. I reached the top of the fire escape, breathing heavily, and pulled the girl into the safety of the rooftop. I couldn't hear the car anymore. It was silent. The rain was still coming down in sheets, but I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. For a moment, everything was still. The girl was trembling, her small body shaking uncontrollably from fear and cold. I kneeled beside her, trying to comfort her the best I could. I didn't have the words. I just held her tightly, as if I could protect her from the storm, from whatever was chasing us. "You're safe now," I whispered, but the words didn't feel like enough. She looked up at me with those big, scared eyes. "Thank you," she said in a small voice, and that was all it took. Her words broke something inside me. The storm was still raging, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was that she was here, with me, and we had escaped. I knew, though, that this wasn't over. The people after her would come looking again, but for now, she was safe, and I would make sure it stayed that way. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me as I stood there, holding the girl close, trying to shield her from the storm and the chaos that was unfolding around us. The rain hadn't let up, and the sound of it pounding against the rooftop was almost deafening. My breathing was heavy, each exhale a mix of exhaustion and determination. We had just escaped from the people chasing us, but I knew this was far from over. The girl was safe for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that trouble wasn't far behind. I looked down at her, her small frame trembling from the cold and fear. Her eyes were wide, still haunted by the nightmare we had just narrowly escaped. She wasn't crying, but I could see the fear in the way she clung to me. I ran a hand through my soaked hair, trying to calm my nerves. The girl needed comfort, but I wasn't sure how to give it. I had always been the protector, the one who stepped in when things went wrong, but this was different. I wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable, and I wasn't used to feeling responsible for someone so young. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She looked up at me, her lips trembling as she answered, "Emily." "Emily," I repeated, nodding. "You're going to be okay. I won't let anyone hurt you." She didn't say anything, just nodded in response, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. I couldn't blame her. After everything she had just gone through, I wouldn't have been sure either. The sound of the storm was all that filled the space between us, and for a moment, I wondered if the people who had chased us would come looking for us. They had been relentless, and I wasn't sure if they would stop until they had what they wanted. "Stay here," I told Emily, and I moved to the edge of the rooftop, peering down to see if anyone was still lurking below. The alley was dark, and the streetlights were barely visible through the rain. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew they could be hiding in the shadows. I needed to make sure we were safe. As I turned back to Emily, I saw her hugging her knees to her chest, her small form curled up in a ball as if she was trying to make herself invisible. My heart sank. This little girl had already been through so much. I couldn't let her face the world alone. I walked over to her, crouching down so I was at her level. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," I said softly. reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. I know it's been scary, I continued, but you're safe now? I promise. She didn't say anything, but I could see the trust starting to form in her eyes. That was enough for me. I had a promise to keep. The rain started to ease up a bit, but the chill in the air was still there. I could feel it seeping into my bones, but I had to focus. We couldn't stay on the rooftop forever. I needed a plan. I helped Emily to her feet, steadying her as she wobbled a bit from the cold and exhaustion. She was small, but strong in her own way. We need to get somewhere safe, I said, more to myself than to her. She nodded silently, clutching her arms around her body for warmth. I could tell she was exhausted. She had been through so much already, and now we had to figure out how to get out of the mess we were in. I led her to the fire escape, making sure she was steady as we made our way down. The sound of distant voices echoed up from the street below, and I froze, listening intently. They were coming. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but I knew they weren't just going to give up. Emily's small hand tightened around mine as she sensed my tension. They're coming, I whispered, pulling her closer. I had to think fast. I knew the area well enough. There was a storage building a few blocks down that might have a way out. I started moving quickly, keeping my steps light and quiet, making sure we weren't being followed. As we rounded a corner, I heard footsteps behind us. My heart skipped a beat. They were getting closer. I didn't have much time. We picked up the pace, weaving through the streets, ducking into alleys and around corners, trying to lose anyone who might be following. Emily was surprisingly fast for her size, but I could see the exhaustion on her face. I knew she wasn't going to last much longer if we didn't find somewhere to rest. I led her into another alley, ducking into a small, narrow doorway that led to a hidden storage area. The door creaked as it closed behind us, but it was the only place I could think of. I turned to Emily, my breath ragged from the run. We'll stay here for now, I said. They won't find us here. She nodded, curling up against the wall, her body trembling from the cold and fear. I couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness wash over me. She was just a kid, and I was the only one who could keep her safe now. I glanced around the room, making sure there were no other entrances, no other ways in. We were alone. For now, at least. I couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was still out there, waiting. I stayed crouched low in the storage room, my back pressed against the cold, concrete wall. Emily was curled up beside me, her small body still shaking from the terror we'd just escaped. The rain had eased up, but I could still hear the distant rumble of thunder and the occasional splash of water running through the streets. We hadn't spoken much since we got here. Emily hadn't said a word, her mind likely still racing, trying to process everything that had happened. I couldn't blame her. I was doing the same. My heart was still pounding in my chest, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. My thoughts kept jumping between two things: the people who had been chasing us and how I could keep Emily safe, and why they were after her in the first place. It didn't add up. As much as I tried to push the questions away, they lingered in the back of my mind. I needed answers. I needed to know who these people were, and more importantly, why they were after a little girl. But there was no time for answers. Not right now. The only thing I could focus on was keeping Emily safe and getting us out of here. I looked down at her, her small frame curled into a ball, her eyes closed as she shivered. I reached over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her without saying anything. She opened her eyes and looked at me, her face pale but calm. "Are they gone?" she asked in a whisper, her voice barely audible. I nodded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "For now," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. We were hiding in a small, abandoned storage unit, tucked away in a part of the city where not many people came. It was the best place I could think of to keep us off the radar for a while. But I knew it wasn't going to be enough forever. They would be looking for us, and sooner or later, we'd have to move again. The question was, where? What do we do now? Emily's voice was shaky, and I could tell she was struggling to keep it together. I didn't have a solid answer for her, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving her alone. "We rest," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "We stay here until we figure out what to do next." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't entirely sure she felt safe. I didn't blame her. I was the same way, but I had to be strong for her. I couldn't let her see the fear I was feeling, not when she needed someone to rely on. I got up slowly, trying to stretch my legs after sitting for so long. The cramped space wasn't exactly comfortable, but it was all we had for now. I needed to keep watch. I wasn't about to let anyone catch us off guard. I moved toward the small window at the back of the room, peering out to see if anyone was nearby. The street was eerily quiet. It seemed like everyone had gone into hiding. But that didn't mean we were safe. I stayed at the window, scanning the area, but the minutes dragged by, and I saw nothing. The sound of rain hitting the roof was the only thing that broke the silence. I turned back to Emily, who had fallen asleep, her head resting on her knees. She looked so small and fragile in the dim light. I hated the thought of her being caught up in all this. She didn't deserve it. She deserved to be at home, playing with her toys, living a normal life, not running from people who wanted to hurt her. I had no idea who they were, but I would find out. I had to. But for now, I had to keep her safe. I sat back down next to her, my body tense, waiting for whatever might come next. We couldn't stay here forever. I needed to figure out our next move, but every plan I came up with felt like a dead end. We needed a place to lay low, somewhere they wouldn't find us. The city was huge, but it wasn't exactly full of hiding places. But I wasn't giving up. I would find a way to keep us safe, no matter what. We'll figure it out, I whispered to myself, more for my own reassurance than hers. But Emily stirred, looking up at me with those big, brown eyes. Will you protect me? She asked, her voice full of vulnerability. Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course I would protect her. I would do whatever it took. Always, I promised, even though I wasn't entirely sure how. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anything happen to her. I would make sure she was safe, even if it meant facing down whatever or whoever was coming after us. I sat in the cold, dimly lit storage room, my eyes glued to the small window, scanning the streets below for any signs of movement. Emily was resting quietly beside me, her small frame still trembling, though the immediate panic seemed to have subsided. The storm had cleared, leaving a damp, heavy air that hung around us like a thick fog. I could feel the weight of the silence, but I knew that it wasn't real peace. The threat was still out there, and we couldn't stay hidden forever. I glanced over at Emily again, her face pale in the low light, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had barely spoken since we arrived here. I understood why. What could she possibly say after what we had just been through? What words were there for the kind of terror we had both faced? I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything was going to be all right. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know how to keep her safe from the people who were hunting us, but I sure as hell wasn't going to stop trying. I rose from my spot on the floor and paced the narrow space, trying to calm my nerves. I knew I couldn't keep hiding in this room forever. Eventually, someone would come looking for us. I could feel it in my gut. Whoever these people were, they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. And from the way they chased us, I knew they weren't afraid to use force to get it. My mind raced through the possibilities, the choices I had. We could keep running, but where would we go? The city was vast, but every street, every alley, felt like a potential trap. We needed a plan. A real one. I turned back to Emily, still sitting silently, and I knelt down beside her, trying to offer a semblance of reassurance. Emily, I said softly, my voice rough from the tension. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with questions, with fear. Are you hungry? I asked, though I wasn't sure if food was what she needed right now. Her stomach had probably been in knots since the chase began. She shook her head, but there was a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. I'm fine, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Are we really safe here? I paused, unsure how to answer her. For now, I said, though I wasn't sure if that was the truth. The reality was that we were running out of time. The longer we stayed in one place, the more likely it was that someone would find us. I had to get us out of here. We need to keep moving, I said, standing up and running a hand through my hair. But we need to be smart about it. Emily nodded slowly, though she seemed far less sure than I was. I couldn't blame her. This wasn't the kind of life a little girl should be forced to lead. I looked around the small, abandoned room again, my eyes scanning every corner, looking for an escape. Do you trust me? I asked, my voice quieter now. She nodded again, but this time, there was a small tear in her eye. I trust you. I felt my heart tighten at her words. She was depending on me, and that weight was heavier than anything I had ever carried. I couldn't afford to fail her. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We'll leave here and find a place where no one can find us. We'll make it through this, I promise. Emily looked up at me, a little more hopeful than before. I didn't know if she truly believed me, but I had to believe it for both of us. I had to keep moving forward. There was no other choice. I helped her to her feet, and we made our way to the back door of the storage unit. I cracked it open carefully, scanning the street outside. It was still quiet, but the longer we stayed, the greater the chance that someone would spot us. I needed to act fast. Stay close, I whispered to her. We stepped outside into the damp night, the air still thick with the remnants of the storm. I led Emily through the alley, my senses on high alert. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet, every shadow a potential threat. We moved quickly, trying to stay out of sight, and every time I heard a car pass or someone's footsteps echo in the distance, my heart skipped a beat. The streets were empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We rounded the corner of an old building, and I saw the lights of a diner up ahead. It was a small, rundown place, but I had been here before. I knew the back exit. It was the perfect place to lie low for a while. We reached the door, and I held it open for Emily, looking around one last time to make sure we weren't followed. We stepped inside, and the warmth hit us immediately, a welcome change from the damp, cold air outside. The diner was quiet, the usual buzz of activity absent in the late hour. The owner, an older man named Frank, looked up from behind the counter as we entered. He gave me a knowing look, one I had seen before. He was a man who had seen his share of trouble. You two running from something? Frank asked, his voice low, but not unfriendly. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Frank had been around long enough to know when someone was on the run. I just nodded and moved to a booth in the corner, the one in the back where no one could see us. I slid into the seat, pulling Emily close beside me. Frank didn't ask questions. He never did. Instead, he brought us a cup of coffee and some water. I didn't drink the coffee. I couldn't. But Emily did sip at the water, her hand still trembling in mine. We'll be safe here for a while, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. I sat in the booth, my back against the wall, watching the door as Emily sipped her water quietly across from me. The diner was empty, save for Frank behind the counter, but the silence felt heavier now. My mind was racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain, thoughts about who was still hunting us and why. I couldn't shake the feeling that this brief moment of calm was just the eye of the storm, and when it passed, things would get much worse. I looked at Emily again, her small frame huddled into the booth, her tired eyes flicking around the room as though she were expecting something, or someone, to burst through the door at any moment. The weight of everything that had happened was still on me. I had promised her I would protect her, but how could I do that when I had no idea who I was protecting her from? The people chasing us had never been identified, but they weren't ordinary criminals. They were too organized, too determined, and they seemed to know exactly where we were at all times. I couldn't trust anyone, and I didn't know where to turn next. My eyes drifted to Frank, who had returned to wiping down the counter, though his eyes were on us. I didn't have to ask him. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he glanced around the room. He knew something. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken understanding that he was waiting for me to ask. And when I did, I didn't even have to say the words. You know something, don't you? I asked, keeping my voice low. Frank paused, his hand still on the rag, but he didn't look up. For a moment, the silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I've seen men like them before, he said finally, his voice gruff. Outlaws who don't take no for an answer. You get too close to their business, and they'll make sure you disappear. I leaned forward slightly, my heart pounding in my chest. What are they after? I asked, barely able to keep the edge out of my voice. Frank shrugged, still not looking directly at me. I don't know, but they don't come around here much unless they're looking for something or someone. And they're not the type to leave witnesses behind. That hit me harder than anything else. I'd seen things like this before. People didn't get involved with people like Frank unless they had something to hide. But the truth was, this was the kind of trouble I didn't want to drag Emily into. I turned back to her, her wide eyes locked on mine. It's okay, I said quietly, more to reassure myself than her. We'll figure this out. She didn't say anything, but I could see the small tremor in her hands as she placed the glass of water down on the table. Her quiet strength was something I hadn't expected, I wondered how long it would take before that strength wore out under the pressure of everything we were facing. Frank cleared his throat, breaking the silence again. You can stay here for a while, he said, still sounding reluctant. But you can't hide forever. These guys, they don't stop. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I know, I said, my voice firm now. I wasn't going to let anyone else dictate our next move. I had made a promise to Emily, and I wasn't going to let some group of faceless thugs tear us apart. I turned to Emily, who was watching me with that same trust in her eyes. She was scared, but she wasn't going to show it. She was stronger than I thought. We need to move again, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We can't stay here. Emily nodded, though I could tell she was still processing everything. I needed a plan, but every thought in my mind felt tangled. I had no idea who the people chasing us were, and I had no way of knowing if we could outrun them or outsmart them. What I didn't know was that I couldn't keep Emily in hiding forever. She deserved better than this. I'll get us out of this, I promised, more to myself than to her. Frank must have sensed my resolve, because he didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to the counter and grabbed something from underneath it. Take this, he said, handing me a small, folded map. I've got a place you can go. It's out of the city, upstate. Not many people know about it, but it's quiet. You might have a chance to lay low there. I took the map without hesitation, tucking it into my jacket. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I needed to keep moving, and Frank had just given me a potential way out. Thanks, I said, nodding. I'll keep that in mind. I turned back to Emily, my heart heavy with the realization that no matter where we went, we wouldn't be free of this until I found out who was behind all of it. And even then, I wasn't sure how we'd escape it. But I had a plan now. At least I could give her that. We couldn't stay here, and I wasn't about to put her life on hold any longer. Let's go, I said, reaching out for her hand. We've got a long road ahead. She stood up, gripping my hand tightly, the only thing that seemed to keep her grounded. We were heading into the unknown, but we weren't doing it alone. Not anymore. I could feel the weight of the map in my pocket as we made our way through the dimly lit streets. The rain had finally stopped, but the city still felt heavy, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Emily walked beside me, her hand firmly grasping mine, and I could feel her small body trembling from the cold, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I knew she was scared. Hell, I was scared too, but I couldn't show it. Not now. We were leaving the safety of the diner, stepping out into the unknown once again. We couldn't stay in one place for too long, and the map Frank had given me seemed like our only shot. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it was better than staying in the city where every corner felt like a trap. As we walked, I kept my eyes moving, scanning the street, checking every shadow and alley. I couldn't afford to be caught off guard. I kept thinking about the people who were after us, whoever they were. They hadn't given up, and I wasn't about to let them get any closer to Emily. I could feel her fear, but I couldn't let her see mine. We're going to be okay, I said, my voice steady, but the doubt lingered inside me like a bad taste I couldn't shake. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide and searching. Will we really be okay? She asked, her voice small. I didn't want to lie to her. I'm doing everything I can to make sure we are, I said, squeezing her hand gently. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could offer. The city felt different tonight, quieter, almost like everyone knew something was coming. As we made our way to the outskirts of town, the streets grew emptier, the buildings more worn down. It wasn't the place for a kid, but it was our best option right now. Frank's map had led us here, and it was a quiet, tucked-away area that could give us some breathing room. But I knew it wouldn't last. The people chasing us would eventually track us down. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. I was getting closer to the answers, but I still didn't have the full picture. We reached the edge of the city and found the old highway that Frank had pointed out. The road was dark, with only the occasional streetlight casting a weak glow. It was just as desolate as I had expected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. As we walked, I heard the faint sound of an engine in the distance. I stopped and pulled Emily closer, my heart racing. The sound grew louder, and I realized someone was driving toward us. I didn't know if it was one of them or just a random passerby, but either way, it was a risk we couldn't afford. I looked around quickly, scanning the area for a place to hide. I spotted an old gas station a few yards away, its lights flickering as if it hadn't been in use for years. Without saying anything, I pulled Emily toward it, my pulse pounding in my ears. We ducked behind the building just as the car came into view. I held my breath, praying that they wouldn't stop. The car slowed as it passed the gas station, but it didn't stop. The headlights disappeared into the night, and the sound of the engine faded. We were safe. For now. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. We need to keep moving, I said quietly. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't say anything. We continued down the road, the silence between us only broken by the occasional sound of our footsteps and the distant rustle of the wind. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain. I didn't know where it would take us, but I knew it was the only way forward. We couldn't stay in one place for too long. The night felt like it was closing in on us, and the weight of the situation was pressing down harder with each passing minute. As we walked, I tried to think of a plan, but the options were limited. We needed to get out of the city, but that meant facing the unknown. I looked at Emily again, her small form silhouetted against the darkened landscape. She was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I needed to stay strong, for her. We'll make it through this, I muttered to myself, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. But what other choice did I have? I wasn't going to give up on her. Not now, not ever. We kept walking, the miles stretching out before us. The city was far behind us now, but I knew we weren't out of danger yet. The night felt endless, like it had no end in sight. But for the first time in a while, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were still moving forward, still alive, still together. That had to count for something. I could feel the tension in the air as we continued down the old highway. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching out into the night like a ribbon of uncertainty. The night was cold, and even though the rain had stopped, the humidity hung in the air, making it hard to breathe. Emily walked beside me, her hand in mine, but her steps were slower now. She was tired, too tired, and I could see the exhaustion in her face. It had been hours since we left the diner, and we were making our way further into the unknown. I could tell she was struggling, but she didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what I was doing, what direction I was heading in. All I knew was that we couldn't stay in the city any longer. We had to keep moving, even if we didn't have a clear plan. The city felt like a trap, and no matter how far we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to give up. I had to protect Emily, but I wasn't sure how. I wasn't sure what the next step was. But I couldn't let her see the doubt in my mind. I had to be the one to keep her safe. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance back every now and then. The quiet was unnerving, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. But it was also a chance to breathe, to think, to regroup. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the tension in my chest. We needed to find somewhere to rest, but there was no telling how far we could go before the people chasing us caught up. Emily looked up at me, her face tired but determined. She didn't say anything, but her grip on my hand tightened. It was as if she was trying to tell me that she was still with me, still trusting me. And that trust was both a blessing and a burden. I couldn't fail her. We had to keep going. We walked for what felt like hours, the road ahead winding through trees and empty fields. I was starting to feel the weight of the journey in my legs, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The road was quiet, too quiet. I kept hearing things, footsteps, distant voices, but every time I turned around, there was nothing. It was like we were being watched, but there was no one there. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, but I didn't want to alarm Emily. She was already scared enough. We needed to find shelter, somewhere safe. Just as I was starting to feel the pressure building, I saw a light in the distance. A small, flickering light, barely visible through the trees. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but it was too far away to tell. I pulled Emily closer, motioning for her to stay quiet. We moved toward the light, careful not to make any noise. As we got closer, I could see that it was a small cabin tucked away in the woods. The light came from a single window, and there was no sign of movement outside. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks. The cabin could be a trap, or it could be our salvation. But we had no other options. We had to take the chance. I moved toward the cabin, Emily close behind me. I could hear her breathing softly, her footsteps barely making a sound. As we reached the door, I paused, my hand resting on the knob. I listened, but there was no sound from inside. I slowly turned the handle, pushing the door open just a crack. The room inside was dark, but there was a faint smell of smoke in the air, like someone had recently used a fireplace. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest, but the cabin was empty. No one was there. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and stepped fully into the cabin, holding the door open for Emily to follow. The room was small, with only a few pieces of furniture, an old wooden table, a couple of chairs, and a fireplace that had clearly been used recently. I closed the door behind us, locking it softly, and moved to the window to peek outside. Everything was quiet. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, but there were no sounds of pursuit. I turned back to Emily, who was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. She looked exhausted, her eyes half closed, but she managed a small smile. "We're safe here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. I needed to believe we were safe, at least for the moment. "We're safe for now," I said, trying to reassure her. But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't the truth. The danger wasn't over. We had just traded one hiding place for another. I walked over to the fireplace and knelt down, gathering some wood and starting a small fire. We needed warmth, and I needed to keep my mind occupied. Emily watched me, her gaze distant, lost in thought. I could see the fear in her eyes, and it made my chest tighten. I had promised her we would make it through this, but the road ahead was still uncertain. I looked at the fire as it began to crackle, the flames dancing in the hearth. It was something familiar, something small and comforting, but I knew it wouldn't last. Eventually, we would have to move again. But for now, we were here. And for the first time in a while, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. I sat there, watching the flames dance in the small fireplace, but my mind was far from the warmth that it offered. The crackling sound of burning would fill the silence of the cabin, but it only seemed to emphasize how alone we were. Emily was still sitting against the wall, her eyes closed, her small body curled up in exhaustion. She was trying to sleep, but I knew better. I knew she was just pretending to rest, like I was, as we both waited for something to happen. We couldn't stay here forever. That much was clear. The cabin felt safe for now, but it was only a temporary refuge. I had no idea how long it would take before they found us, and when they did, I didn't know what kind of hell we would be walking into. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but whenever I checked, there was nothing. Nothing except the wind blowing through the trees, the occasional rustle of leaves outside. I didn't like it. It was too quiet, too still. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing around the room. The dim light from the fireplace barely lit the small space. I moved closer to the window, peering through the cracks in the old wooden shutters. The moon was barely visible behind the clouds, but I could still make out the shapes of trees in the distance. The night felt oppressive, like the darkness itself was closing in on us. I turned away from the window, my gaze drifting back to Emily. Her breathing had slowed, and I could see the subtle rise and fall of her chest. She was asleep now, or at least pretending to be, and I didn't want to disturb her. She needed the rest. She deserved the rest. I wished I could let her believe that everything would be okay, that we were safe. But deep down, I knew the truth. Safety was just an illusion. We were running, hiding, trying to outrun whatever was coming for us. But the people chasing us weren't going to stop. They'd find us eventually. They always did. I stood by the door, listening. The silence outside felt like it was pressing in on me. The feeling of being hunted was almost unbearable. But I couldn't let Emily see it. She was already scared enough. I needed to stay calm for her. I needed to figure out our next move. There was a knock at the door. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but then it came again, louder this time, more insistent. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Emily woke with a start, her wide eyes filled with fear. "What was that?" she whispered. "Shoo," I said quickly, holding a finger to my lips, signaling for her to stay quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest, my instincts on high alert. I crept to the door, my hand hovering over the knob. I wasn't sure if it was them, the people who had been chasing us, or if it was someone else. But I couldn't take the risk. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear. There was a soft voice outside, but it was muffled by the thick wood. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was familiar. It was calm, reassuring. I didn't know who it was, but I couldn't risk opening the door. I backed away slowly, making sure Emily stayed behind me. I glanced around the cabin, my mind racing for a plan. There was a back window, but I didn't know where it led. We couldn't stay here any longer. If they were close, we would have to move. I turned to Emily, my voice low. We need to leave. Now. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. What if they come in? She whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have an answer for her. But I knew that staying here was too dangerous. We couldn't risk being trapped. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back window. I lifted the shutters carefully, peering out into the dark yard. The night was quiet, too quiet. But I didn't hear anything moving, so I opened the window slowly, trying not to make any noise. Stay close, I whispered to Emily, helping her climb out first. The cold air hit me as I followed her through the window, my feet hitting the wet ground. I had no idea where we were going. I just knew we couldn't stay here. We moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, keeping low as we crossed the yard. The cabin was now behind us, and the woods ahead felt like the only escape. I glanced over my shoulder once, but there was no sign of anyone. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but I had to trust my instincts. We couldn't stop. We couldn't afford to slow down. We kept moving through the woods, the sounds of the forest around us filling the silence. The crunch of leaves beneath our feet, the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. We moved as quickly as we could, but I knew we couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, we would run out of places to hide. But for now, it was the only choice we had. We had to keep going. And no matter how much I wanted to believe it, I couldn't let Emily see the fear that was building inside me. I had to keep moving forward. For her. For both of us. I could feel the weight of every step we took as we moved further into the woods. The night was quiet, but the air was thick with the feeling that we were being followed, like shadows were closing in from all sides. Emily walked quietly beside me, her small hand gripping mine tightly as we navigated the thick underbrush. The woods were dense here, with trees pressing in on both sides, their branches like long fingers reaching out toward us. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of animals in the night. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but I couldn't afford to stop. I had promised Emily that I would protect her, and I would keep that promise no matter what. I glanced down at her, her face pale in the dim light, but her eyes were sharp, always scanning our surroundings. She was scared, but she was strong. Stronger than I thought. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way she stayed close to me without hesitation. It was a small comfort in a world that felt like it was falling apart. We couldn't stay in one place too long, and the cabin had already been a risk. The people who were after us were relentless, and every moment we wasted was another chance for them to catch up. I wasn't going to let that happen. I kept my eyes ahead, moving as quickly as I dared through the trees. We were headed for an old abandoned barn I knew about, a place I had used once before when I needed to lay low. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. We needed shelter, and the barn would give us that for a while. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made my heart race. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing. At least, nothing that I could see. Emily must have sensed my unease because she tugged on my sleeve, her voice barely a whisper. "Are they still following us?" she asked, her words full of fear. I stopped for a moment, crouching down so I was at eye level with her. I could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that she was trying so hard to hide. I didn't want to lie to her, but I couldn't tell her the truth. "Not yet. I'm not sure," I said softly. "But we need to keep moving." I squeezed her hand gently, hoping it would comfort her. She nodded, and we started walking again. The barn was close, just a few more minutes through the woods. I could see the outline of it in the distance, the faint silhouette of the old building against the dark sky. I pushed forward, my mind focused on the goal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we approached the barn, I felt a sharp twinge of fear in my gut. It was too quiet. The barn was still standing, but it didn't look like it had been used in years. The roof was sagging in places, and the wooden walls were weathered and cracked. But it was our best shot at safety. I reached the barn first, motioning for Emily to stay close as I carefully pushed the door open. The hinges creaked in protest, but the door swung wide enough to let us in. I stepped inside first, my eyes scanning the dark interior. It smelled musty, like old hay and wood, but it was dry. Safe. For now. I motioned for Emily to follow me inside, and she did without hesitation, her eyes wide as she took in our surroundings. The barn was empty except for some old farm equipment, a few broken crates, and piles of hay scattered across the floor. I closed the door quietly behind us, trying to keep the noise to a minimum. We were safe here, at least for a little while. I looked around the barn, searching for a place to rest. There was a small loft area in the back, a wooden ladder leading up to it. It wasn't ideal, but it would do. I helped Emily up the ladder first, making sure she was steady as she climbed. I followed behind her, keeping close in case she lost her balance. The loft was small, but it had a better view of the surrounding area. I could see the trees stretching out beyond the barn, and I felt a slight sense of relief. We were hidden for now. I sat down on the floor beside Emily, my back resting against the rough wood of the loft. The sound of the wind outside was the only noise now, and for a moment, I allowed myself to relax. Emily was already curled up against the wall, her eyes closed, though I could tell she wasn't asleep. Her body was still tense, and I knew she was listening for any sound that might signal danger. "We'll be okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. Emily didn't respond, but I could see her breathing slowing down, a small sign that she was beginning to trust. That we were safe. For now we were. But I knew the people after us wouldn't give up. They would keep looking, and sooner or later, they would find us again. I had to be ready. I had to keep moving forward. But for now, I let myself rest. We had earned it. I woke up to the sound of creaking wood above me. It was still dark, but the quiet of the night was now replaced with the chill of dawn creeping through the gaps in the barn walls. The fire in the loft had died down, leaving only the faintest glow from the embers. Emily was still asleep beside me, her small body curled tightly into a ball for warmth. I hadn't slept much myself, too many thoughts racing through my head, but I couldn't allow myself to let my guard down for long. They were still out there, the people chasing us. I didn't know when they'd find us or how, but I knew it was inevitable. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. I glanced around the small loft, looking out through the cracks in the wood. The woods outside were still and silent, but something about the stillness made my skin crawl. It was too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. The barn itself felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing in tighter the longer we stayed. I didn't want to wake Emily yet. She needed the rest more than I did. But the constant weight of the situation kept gnawing at me. I had no idea how long we could keep running or where we would go next. The map Frank had given me was a lifeline, but I didn't know where it would lead. I couldn't rely on that forever. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake the anxiety that was slowly building up inside me. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and hay. I had to move again soon, had to make decisions, but it was hard to think clearly when I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. The barn wasn't much of a hiding place. It was a shelter for now, but I could already feel the walls closing in. I couldn't help but wonder if the people after us were already onto our trail, if they were closing in without us even knowing it. I stood up slowly, careful not to disturb Emily. I walked to the small window, peering through the cracks. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the faintest hint of gray creeping into the dark canvas of the night. I squinted, trying to make out any shapes in the distance, any sign of movement. But all I could see was the same empty stretch of land. Still, I wasn't ready to relax. I had to be prepared. I needed to think of what to do next, and soon. There was no time for hesitation. I turned back to the loft and saw Emily shifting in her sleep. Her face was peaceful now, but I knew it wouldn't last. She would wake soon, and when she did, we would have to keep moving. I didn't want to drag her into this. I never asked for any of this, but now she was part of it. I walked back over to her, kneeling beside her and gently shaking her shoulder. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Hey, kiddo," I said softly. She blinked up at me, her expression still clouded with sleep. "Are we leaving?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Yeah, we're not staying here. We need to keep moving." She didn't protest. She had learned to keep quiet during the chaos of the last few days. She knew the drill. I helped her to her feet, and we made our way down the ladder, the creaking of the wood the only sound in the stillness. The barn felt like a prison now, a place we had to leave before it became a trap. I grabbed the map Frank had given me and unfolded it. It was old, worn around the edges, but it might still have some answers. I spread it out on the table, trying to make sense of the paths, the directions. I had no idea where I was going, but I had to find somewhere safer. We couldn't keep running in circles. There was a road about 10 miles away that might lead to a town, a small place where we could blend in. It was a chance, but it was the only one we had. We're going to head for this road, I said, pointing to the map. It's our best shot. Emily nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes again. It wasn't something she could hide. Will we be okay? She asked, her voice small. I met her gaze, trying to keep my own fear hidden. We will be, I said, even though I didn't feel it. I folded the map and stuffed it into my jacket, motioning for Emily to follow me. We left the barn quickly, the woods still quiet as we made our way through the trees. The morning light had begun to fill the sky, but the shadows still stretched long across the ground. I kept a close eye on our surroundings, my heart racing with every step. We had to keep moving, but the danger felt closer now. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, and I was right. As we reached the edge of the trees, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine in the distance. The sound sent a rush of panic through my body. I turned to Emily, my voice urgent. Get down. I whispered harshly. We dropped to the ground, our bodies pressed against the cool earth as the sound of the engine grew closer. My heart was pounding in my chest. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't see us, hoping that we could stay hidden long enough to make our next move. The car engine rumbled past, but I didn't dare move until it was out of earshot. When I finally raised my head and looked around, the road was empty again, but I could feel the danger getting closer. I grabbed Emily's hand again, my grip tight. Let's go, I said, my voice low but firm. We couldn't stop now. We couldn't afford to get caught. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, my heart still racing as the dust from the gravel path kicked up behind us. The car that had passed earlier had disappeared into the distance, but I knew better than to think we were safe. I couldn't stop moving. Every time I tried to breathe, it felt like the air was too thick with danger. Emily was walking beside me, her small hand clasped tightly in mine. She was quiet now, the fear in her eyes replaced by a kind of cautious resolve. She didn't speak, but I could feel her trust in me, a trust that both reassured and terrified me. I had no idea how much longer I could keep her safe. The landscape was open now, with just rolling fields and patches of trees. It should have been peaceful, but the quiet only made the tension worse. We were exposed here. If anyone was looking for us, this wide, open land would make it easy for them to spot us. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the horizon for any movement. The road we were on seemed to stretch forever, a long and winding path that felt like it would never end. It was starting to feel like we had been walking forever, and yet there was no sense of escape. Just one step in front of the other. I kept moving forward. Do you think they'll find us? Emily's voice broke the silence, soft and uncertain. I looked down at her, trying to gauge her expression. She was still scared, but I could see that she was trying to be brave. She was stronger than I thought, stronger than I felt. I don't know, I said, my voice steady, even though inside, I was just as uncertain as she was. But I'm not going to let them get to you. She nodded quietly, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I had said those words many times before, but this time they felt heavier. The truth was, I didn't know if I could keep that promise. I didn't know if I could outrun what was coming. We walked for what felt like hours, the sun rising higher in the sky. The air was warmer now, but the weight of everything still clung to us. We were both tired, both running on empty. I could feel it in every step I took, the ache in my legs, the pounding in my chest. But we couldn't stop. I glanced over at Emily again. She was still holding my hand, but her steps were slower now. She was exhausted, and I knew it. I had to find somewhere safe for her to rest. Somewhere that we could regroup, where we wouldn't have to keep running. I wasn't sure where that place was, but I had to find it. I couldn't keep dragging her from one hiding place to another. She deserved more than this. We passed a small creek, the water running quietly over rocks. I paused for a moment, kneeling down to drink from the stream. Emily followed me, sitting down beside me and dipping her hands into the cool water. For a moment, we were just two people in the world, caught in a quiet moment of peace. I let myself relax, just for a moment, as I watched her. She was so small, so vulnerable. I wanted to protect her from everything, but I knew that I couldn't. There was too much at stake. I had to keep moving. We need to keep going, I said, standing up and pulling her gently to her feet. She nodded, but I could see the weariness in her face. I had to get her to safety. I had to keep her safe. We continued walking, the fields stretching out around us, but I kept my eyes on the horizon, knowing that danger was still out there. I had no idea how much further we would have to go before we could finally get away from the people who were after us, but I knew I couldn't stop until we were out of reach. We walked for another hour, the distance between us and the city growing longer with each step. The sound of our footsteps was the only thing breaking the silence now, the wind whispering through the grass. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, how far we had come, how much we had endured, and how much was still ahead of us. It felt like we were always running, always escaping, but never truly free. We were caught in a cycle, one that I didn't know how to break. But I would break it. I had to. We couldn't live like this forever. I stopped again, looking at the road ahead. There was a small town in the distance, just visible beyond the tree line. It was our first real sign of civilization in what felt like forever, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a decision, a chance, but also a risk. I turned to Emily, seeing the uncertainty in her eyes. "We're going to go there," I said, my voice firm, though I wasn't sure what we would find. She nodded silently, but I could tell she was trying to find some comfort in my words. We kept walking, heading toward the town, our footsteps echoing in the silence, knowing that with each step, we were one step closer to something. I didn't know what that something was, but I was determined to find out. For Emily. For both of us.